The cowboy who saved the monster and showed the town what humanity really means. The town of Red Hollow sat quietly between open plains and long stretches of grazing land, where the wind moved like a slow breath across the grass. Nothing changed quickly there. People woke early, worked hard, and trusted what they already knew. Outsiders rarely stayed long, and when they did, they were watched carefully. The town believed in routine, in familiar faces, and in stories that had been told the same way for years. One morning, as the sky carried the pale colors of early autumn, a stranger arrived. No one saw exactly when the stranger came into town. Some said they noticed a figure walking along the old road near Miller's Field before sunrise. Others claimed they first spotted someone sitting near the abandoned train shed at the edge of town. Within hours, whispers began spreading through the streets, like drifting dust. "Did you hear?" one shopkeeper said to another. "Someone new is here." "Looks strange," another replied quietly. "Not from around here." People glanced through windows or paused during conversations just long enough to watch from a distance. The stranger wore worn clothing, patched and faded by time. Their posture was guarded, shoulders slightly hunched, as if they expected trouble even from silence. They kept their head down and avoided eye contact, moving carefully as though every step had to be measured. The first person to use the word monster did not mean it as a joke. It slipped out during a nervous conversation at the diner where townsfolk gathered every morning for coffee and news. "I don't like the look of them," someone muttered. "Feels wrong." Another voice added, "Best keep an eye out." You never know these days. And just like that, the word took hold. It was easier to call someone a monster than to admit fear of the unknown. By afternoon, the label had spread quietly through Red Hollow. No one asked where the stranger came from. No one knew their story, but people already believed they understood enough. Ethan Hale noticed the change before he noticed the stranger. Ethan ran a small ranch just outside town. He was known for keeping mostly to himself, though he was respected for his steady nature and willingness to help when needed. Years of working alone had made him patient and observant. He listened more than he spoke, and he rarely judged without reason. That afternoon, he rode into town for supplies. The air felt tense, conversations quieter than usual. People spoke in low voices, glancing toward the windows. "What's going on?" Ethan asked the store owner while loading feed sacks. "You didn't hear?" the man replied. "There's someone new. Folks say something's not right." Ethan shrugged lightly. People say many things. Still, curiosity pulled at him. As he stepped back into the sunlight, he saw the stranger for the first time. They sat alone on a wooden bench near the old train tracks. Dust swirled around their boots. From a distance, they did not look dangerous, only tired, very tired. Their face carried the weight of someone who had traveled far without rest. A small bag lay at their feet, the only sign of belongings. People passed by without stopping. Some looked away quickly. Others stared openly but kept moving. Ethan watched for a moment, sensing the quiet barrier between the stranger and everyone else. He knew that kind of silence. Years ago, after losing his family, Ethan had felt like an outsider in his own life. He remembered how people sometimes avoided grief because they did not know what to say. He remembered how loneliness could feel heavier than any physical burden. Without thinking too much, he walked toward the bench. The stranger noticed him approaching and stiffened slightly, ready to stand or leave if needed. "Mind if I sit?" Ethan asked calmly. The stranger hesitated but gave a small nod. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The wind moved gently, carrying the distant sound of cattle and the faint ringing of a bell from the church tower. "You passing through?" Ethan asked finally. "Maybe," the stranger replied softly. Their voice carried both caution and weariness. "Town's quiet," Ethan said. "People like things simple here." "I noticed," the stranger answered, eyes still focused on the ground. Ethan sensed hesitation, not rudeness, but self-protection. He did not push for details. Instead, he offered a small smile. "Well, if you need anything, folks here usually help once they know someone." The stranger gave a faint, almost surprised look, as if kindness had caught them off guard.
"Thank you," they said quietly. The conversation ended there, but something had shifted.
Ethan stood and tipped his hat slightly before walking away, leaving the stranger alone again, yet perhaps a little less invisible. By evening, rumors had grown stronger. At the diner, conversations turned sharper. Someone claimed the stranger had been seen near a closed barn. Another insisted they had heard strange noises during the night. Each story added layers to the growing fear, though none were confirmed. Fear often grows faster than truth. The town council began discussing whether the stranger should be asked to leave. Some argued it was better to act early rather than risk trouble. Others simply felt uncomfortable without knowing why. Meanwhile, the stranger remained quiet, staying near the edge of town. They avoided crowds and kept interactions brief. Yet their presence felt larger than life because of the stories people created around them. The next morning, Ethan returned with extra food packed in a small basket. He found the stranger near a patch of dry grass behind the train shed. "Figured you might be hungry," he said, setting the basket down. The stranger stared at it, unsure how to react.
"You don't have to," they said.
"I know," Ethan replied gently, "but I want to." Slowly the stranger accepted the food, their hands trembling slightly. No one had offered them help without asking for something in return for a long time. They ate quietly while Ethan sat nearby, not demanding conversation. The silence felt different now, less heavy, more comfortable. "You don't seem afraid," the stranger said after a while. Ethan considered the question. "I try not to fear what I don't understand." The stranger looked at him carefully, searching for judgment but finding none. Around them, the town continued its daily rhythm, unaware that small moments were already shaping a larger story. Over the next few days, Ethan's small acts of kindness did not go unnoticed. Some people warned him to be careful, others questioned his judgment.
"You don't know who they are," one neighbor said.
"That's true," Ethan replied calmly. "But I'd rather learn than assume." As pressure from the community grew, the stranger felt it too. They noticed the looks, the distance, the way conversation stopped when they walked past. Old memories of rejection began resurfacing, making them wonder if leaving would be easier than staying. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft orange light, the stranger stood near the road as if preparing to walk away from Red Hollow forever. Ethan approached quietly. "Thinking of leaving?" he asked. "Seems like that's what everyone wants," the stranger answered. Ethan shook his head gently. "Not everyone." The stranger looked at him, uncertain but hopeful. The days after Ethan first spoke to the stranger felt heavier than before. Red Hollow was a small town where nothing stayed secret for long, and now everyone knew that the quiet rancher had chosen to spend time with the person they had already decided did not belong. Whispers followed Ethan wherever he went. Some people spoke kindly but with concern, while others shook their heads in quiet disapproval. At the feed store, conversations paused when he entered. At the diner, chairs shifted slightly farther away from him than usual. It was not open hostility, but it was enough to show that people were watching closely. Ethan noticed the change, but he did not let it change his behavior. Each morning he brought small things to the stranger: fresh water, simple meals, and once a warm blanket when the night air grew colder. He never forced conversation, and he never asked questions that felt too personal. Instead, he allowed silence to exist naturally between them, giving space for trust to grow. The stranger slowly began to relax in his presence. They learned that Ethan's ranch sat beyond the hills, where cattle moved slowly across open land, and the sky felt wide enough to hold every worry. He spoke about the work honestly, without pride or complaint. Listening to him felt calm, like sitting near a steady fire. "You help people without asking anything," the stranger said one afternoon. Ethan shrugged. "Everyone needs help sometimes." The stranger looked down at their hands. "Not everyone gives it." In town, however, opinions were becoming stronger. At the weekly market, a group gathered near the old clock tower to discuss what should be done. Some argued that allowing the stranger to stay could invite trouble. Others admitted they had never actually seen the stranger do anything wrong, but still felt uneasy.
"It's not about proof," one man said.
"It's about feeling safe," another replied. "But how do we know they aren't dangerous?" Fear moved through the group like wind through dry grass, unseen but powerful. Later that day, Ethan overheard two neighbors talking outside the general store. "He's risking his reputation," one said quietly. "All for someone he doesn't even know," the other replied. Ethan did not respond. He simply continued loading supplies into his truck, aware that defending the stranger would not be easy. Meanwhile, the stranger struggled with the growing tension. They noticed how shopkeepers watched carefully when they entered stores, and how conversations stopped when they approached. Every glance felt like a question they could not answer. One evening, as the sun faded into deep purple shadows, they spoke openly to Ethan for the first time. "I didn't want this," they said softly. "I never want trouble. I should leave before it gets worse." Ethan thought carefully before answering. "Leaving might stop the noise for now, but running doesn't always solve the real problem." "And staying?" the stranger asked. "Staying takes courage," he said gently. "But sometimes it gives people a chance to learn." The stranger remained silent, considering his words. Over the next few days, small changes began happening. An elderly woman dropped a basket of groceries near the street. Before anyone else reacted, the stranger stepped forward and helped gather the items, handing them back with quiet respect. The woman hesitated at first, but then thanked them with a soft smile. "A young boy lost his toy near the train tracks." The stranger found it and returned it without expecting praise. The boy's parents watched carefully, unsure how to react, but they could not ignore the kindness. These small moments did not erase fear completely, but they created doubt within it. Still, not everyone changed their mind. One afternoon, a minor incident shook the town. A shed behind the bakery was found damaged after a strong windstorm during the night. Without evidence, some people immediately blamed the stranger. "They were seen nearby yesterday," someone claimed. "That's enough for me," another said. The rumor spread quickly, growing stronger each time it was repeated. By evening, people gathered outside the bakery, talking loudly about responsibility and safety. Ethan arrived just as voices began rising. "Has anyone asked what really happened?" he asked calmly. No one answered directly. Instead, someone said, "Why take chances? We should ask them to leave." Ethan felt frustration but kept his voice steady. "Fear doesn't make something true." The crowd quieted slightly, unsure how to respond. Later, Ethan walked to the train shed to speak with the stranger. He found them sitting alone, eyes filled with worry. "I heard what they're saying," the stranger said before he spoke. "They don't know the truth yet," Ethan replied. "They don't want to know," the stranger whispered. Ethan sat beside them, thinking carefully. "People are afraid because they don't understand," he said. "Sometimes it takes time for hearts to catch up with reality." The stranger shook their head slowly. "I've heard that before. Usually, it doesn't end well." Ethan felt the weight behind those words, but chose not to ask for details yet. Instead, he said, "You're not alone this time." The next morning, the bakery owner discovered that the damage to the shed had clearly been caused by falling branches from the storm. The rumor faded quickly, but the emotional effect remained. The stranger felt exposed, as if they were constantly being judged for things they had not done. Ethan noticed the change in their posture, more guarded, more distant. To help ease tension, he invited them to visit his ranch. At first, they refused, unsure whether entering his world would create more problems for him. But after some encouragement, they agreed. The ride to the ranch felt quiet and peaceful. Wide fields stretched under the open sky, far from the watchful eyes of the town. The stranger seemed to breathe more freely there. "You built this alone?" they asked, looking around. "Not alone," Ethan said softly. "Just slowly." He showed them the barns, the fences, and the small house that carried memories of both happiness and loss. Without saying it directly, he allowed them to see that he understood loneliness. For the first time, the stranger laughed. A small, unexpected sound that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Back in town, however, rumors continued. Some people believed Ethan was being foolish. Others secretly admired his courage but did not say so openly. The town stood divided between fear and curiosity. One evening, as Ethan and the stranger walked along the dusty road near the ranch, the stranger spoke again about their past. "I've been called many things," they said quietly. "Most people decide who I am before they know me." Ethan listened carefully, sensing that deeper truths were waiting to be shared when trust felt strong enough. As the sky darkened and stars began appearing one by one, the stranger added softly, "You're the first person who asked nothing from me." Ethan smiled gently. Sometimes that's enough. The town had not fully accepted the stranger yet, and tension still lingered beneath daily routines. The quiet tension in Red Hollow did not disappear overnight. Even after the truth about the damaged bakery shed became clear, people continued watching the stranger carefully. Some spoke more politely now, but many still kept their distance. Fear does not vanish quickly. It slowly fades when new experiences begin to replace old assumptions. For the stranger, each day felt like walking across thin ice. One wrong step could bring back the whispers, the labels, and the feeling of being unwanted. They tried to stay invisible, moving quietly through town and avoiding crowded places. Yet the more they tried to remain unnoticed, the more people seemed to notice them. Ethan understood that change would not come through arguments or forcing opinions. He believed people needed to see truth with their own eyes. So instead of defending the stranger with words alone, he simply continued treating them with kindness and respect, allowing others to observe naturally. One morning, the town woke to a broken fence near the schoolyard. Several goats from a nearby farm had wandered into the area, causing confusion among parents and children arriving for the day. While adults argued about who should fix the problem, the stranger stepped forward quietly and began guiding the animals back toward the gate. They moved carefully, speaking softly to calm the animals. Within minutes, the situation was under control. A few parents watched from a distance, surprised by the gentle way the stranger handled everything. A young girl clapped happily when the last goat was guided out, and the stranger smiled shyly before stepping away. Some people exchanged glances. It was not what they expected. Later that week, the stranger noticed Mrs. Carter, an elderly woman known for her stubborn independence, struggling to carry firewood outside her home. Without asking permission, they approached slowly and offered help. Mrs. Carter hesitated at first, remembering the rumors, but her tired arms finally gave in. "Just this once," she said. Together they stacked the wood neatly by her door. The stranger worked silently, not seeking conversation or praise. When they finished, they simply nodded and began walking away. "Wait." Mrs. Carter called softly, "Thank you." Her voice carried sincerity. It was a small moment, but it spread quietly through town, carried by her words to others. Despite these positive moments, not everyone changed their view. A few community leaders continued expressing concern. They argued that kindness did not erase uncertainty. Some felt that allowing the stranger to stay would invite risk, even though no real problem had occurred. Ethan heard these conversations but chose patience over confrontation. He believed that real change came from lived experiences, not debates. One afternoon, while walking near the edge of town, the stranger spoke more openly about their past than ever before. "I didn't always live like this," they said quietly. "There was a time when I trusted people easily. I used to believe that if you worked hard and treated others well, you would belong somewhere," the stranger continued. "But sometimes people decide who you are before they know you. Once that happens, it's hard to change their minds." Ethan nodded slowly. "I know that feeling." The stranger looked at him with curiosity. "When my life changed," Ethan explained gently, "people saw me differently too. Some thought I was broken, Some stayed away because they didn't know what to say.
"What did you do?" the stranger asked.
"I kept living," he said simply. "And I learned that the right people eventually see you for who you are." The conversation lingered in the air, heavy, yet comforting. Days passed with small improvements. A shopkeeper who once watched the stranger suspiciously now greeted them with a quiet nod. A group of children waved shyly as they passed. These moments felt fragile, like seeds just beginning to grow. Then came the storm. Dark clouds gathered suddenly one afternoon, covering the sky with heavy shadows. The wind grew stronger, pushing dust across the streets and rattling windows. People hurried home, securing doors and gathering animals before the rain arrived. Ethan sensed trouble immediately. The air felt charged with urgency, and the horizon carried a deep rumble. Within an hour, strong winds swept through Red Hollow. Rain fell hard, turning dirt roads into slippery paths. A large tree near the river fell across a small bridge, blocking access to several homes. Power flickered, and the town fell into a tense silence broken only by the sound of wind and rain. As the storm intensified, a call for help spread quickly. A family living near the edge of town needed assistance moving their animals to safer ground. Several neighbors hesitated, unsure if it was safe to go outside. Without hesitation, the stranger stepped forward.
"I can help," they said.
Ethan joined them immediately. Together they moved through the storm, guiding frightened animals and helping residents secure loose structures. The stranger worked tirelessly, ignoring the cold rain and strong wind. Their focus remained on helping others, not on being seen or praised. At one point, a small group of townspeople found themselves trapped near a flooded path. The stranger carefully helped them cross safely, offering steady support and calm instructions. Those who once avoided them now relied on their strength and patience. Witnesses began seeing a different image. Not a monster, but someone brave and selfless. By the time the storm began to weaken, many residents had directly experienced the stranger's kindness. Exhausted but determined, they returned to town alongside Ethan, soaked and tired but satisfied that everyone was safe. The following morning felt different. People gathered in small groups, talking about what had happened during the storm. Stories spread quickly about how the stranger had helped without hesitation. Some expressed gratitude openly, while others listened quietly, their earlier assumptions slowly fading. One man who had been openly critical approached Ethan. "They helped my family," he admitted. "I didn't expect that." Ethan simply nodded. "Sometimes people surprise us when we give them the chance." The stranger, however, felt unsure how to react to the sudden change in attitude. They had experienced temporary acceptance before in other places, only to face rejection later. Trust did not come easily. "You don't have to prove anything," Ethan told them gently when they expressed doubt. "I'm not trying to prove anything," they replied softly. "I just don't want to lose what little peace I've found here." As the town slowly recovered from the storm, conversations shifted. Fear still existed, but it was no longer the strongest voice. Curiosity and respect began replacing it. The days after the storm brought a quiet change to Red Hollow. People began noticing the stranger more, but this time it was different. There was respect hidden beneath the whispers, curiosity beneath the cautious glances. The town still talked about them, but the conversations were no longer filled only with fear. Instead, small acts of kindness had started to challenge old assumptions. The stranger moved with slightly more confidence now, though they still avoided crowded places. Each morning they continued walking along the edge of town, sometimes stopping to help a neighbor carry groceries or tend to animals. They never asked for thanks and rarely spoke more than a few words. Yet the residents could not help but notice. They began to realize that the so-called monster they had feared was someone willing to put themselves in harm's way for the good of others. Ethan watched these changes quietly. He knew transformation took time. Patience, he thought, was the key.
He continued inviting the stranger to the ranch, offering a safe place to rest, to talk, or simply to be.
The open plains, the grazing cattle, and the slow rhythm of ranch life gave the stranger a sense of normalcy they hadn't felt in years. The stranger began opening up more, sharing stories of past hardships and small hopes for the future. One morning, the stranger helped repair a fence along the riverbank. A family living nearby had a stretch of land that bordered the river, and after the storm, much of their fencing had been damaged. Without hesitation, the stranger rolled up their sleeves, collected supplies, and began working. Children from the neighborhood came to watch, curious about the quiet figure they had once feared. The stranger smiled gently when the children offered help, showing them how to hammer nails carefully and tie knots in the rope. A few adults came by to watch, whispering among themselves. "I didn't think they'd know how to do this," one said quietly. Another nodded. "Maybe we judged too quickly." The stranger continued working, speaking calmly and giving instructions only when necessary. The fence was finished by evening, sturdy and neat, a symbol of effort and cooperation. When the family expressed their gratitude, the stranger simply nodded and returned to their path along the edge of town. Yet that day the town had seen something undeniable: courage, skill, and heart. As the stranger's actions continued to ripple through Red Hollow, even the skeptics began to notice. A few parents thanked them quietly when they returned lost children's pets or helped fix a wagon stuck in the mud. Each small act slowly reshaped opinions. People who had never spoken to them before started offering polite greetings, nods, or gentle smiles. The walls built by fear were cracking, though some still remained cautious. Ethan and the stranger often walked together along the dusty roads at sunset. The wide sky and golden light offered a sense of calm, and during these walks, conversations flowed more freely. "I never knew people could be so quick to judge," the stranger said one evening. "It feels like everywhere I went before, fear followed me." Ethan listened, understanding in his eyes. "Fear is easy. Understanding takes effort. Most people choose fear because it is simple." The stranger looked at him carefully. "You chose differently."
"I try," Ethan replied softly. "It's not always easy, but it's worth it." The connection between them grew slowly.
The stranger found comfort in Ethan's steady presence, someone who had experienced loneliness and hardship, yet chose kindness and trust. And Ethan saw in the stranger resilience and courage, a person who had survived many hardships and still offered help when it mattered most. One afternoon, the stranger heard about a barn fire on the outskirts of town. Smoke rose quickly, and the wind carried embers dangerously close to nearby homes. Without hesitation, they ran toward the blaze, with Ethan following. They worked tirelessly, helping neighbors move livestock and secure valuable equipment. Their quick thinking and calm instructions prevented what could have been a disaster. The people who had watched from a distance could not deny it this time. The stranger had saved more than property. They had protected lives. Even the most doubtful townsfolk began to see the truth. Fear and judgment were no longer enough to hide the reality of who this person really was. After the fire was under control, townspeople gathered quietly near the edge of the field. Some offered thanks. Others simply stood, unsure how to respond to someone they had once labeled a monster. The stranger smiled faintly, acknowledging the gratitude without seeking attention. Days turned into weeks, and the town's attitude continued to shift. The stranger became part of the rhythm of Red Hollow. People still observed cautiously, but now they spoke with curiosity, offering small gestures of friendship and respect. Children waved and ran to greet them. Neighbors invited them to help with daily chores or offered refreshments when passing by. The stranger's cautious trust in the town grew, but they remained careful. They had learned that acceptance could be fleeting, that kindness was not always permanent. Yet they began to allow themselves to hope, knowing that some hearts had changed genuinely. One evening, Ethan invited the stranger to sit with him on the porch of his ranch house, overlooking the grazing land. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and pink. "Do you think they'll ever fully accept me?" the stranger asked quietly. Ethan looked out over the fields before answering. "I think some already do. Others will need time. People can change if they choose to." The stranger smiled softly, a feeling of relief washing over them. For the first time in a long while, they felt a sense of belonging, even if only slowly building. Meanwhile, the town continued to learn valuable lessons. People began to question their own fears, understanding that assumptions based on appearances could be wrong. They saw that courage and kindness mattered more than labels. Conversations began to change. Children repeated stories of the stranger's bravery, and adults quietly admitted that their judgment had been unfair. Even the most hesitant neighbors started small acts of reconciliation, helping with chores, speaking politely, offering a wave. The stranger noticed and appreciated each gesture. Each interaction was proof that change was possible when actions spoke louder than fear. One morning, the stranger helped deliver supplies to a family with a sick child. They carried food and firewood up the steps, offering comfort and quiet words of encouragement. The family's gratitude was heartfelt, and for the first time, the stranger felt fully seen. Not as a threat, but as someone who could make a real difference. Ethan watched from a distance, proud but silent. He knew the real transformation had happened not just for the stranger, but for the town itself. Red Hollow was learning what humanity truly meant. Kindness, courage, and understanding could bridge the deepest divides. As weeks passed, the stranger's presence became natural. They moved through the town not as an outsider, but as someone quietly connected to the community. Their work, their courage, and their consistent kindness had reshaped hearts. They no longer walked with fear in their steps, and the town no longer whispered judgment in their shadow. The stranger began participating more openly, helping in the fields, assisting with repairs, and guiding children safely along paths. Even those who had been slow to trust began to rely on them, seeking guidance and support. Ethan and the stranger often walked the hills surrounding Red Hollow together. The sun painted long shadows across the open land, and the two spoke quietly about life, resilience, and hope. They shared stories of struggle and survival, of fear and courage. Trust grew naturally, and a bond formed, built on understanding and shared experiences. The town had changed in small but important ways. Fear and judgment still lingered in some corners, but the majority had begun to see beyond appearances. They had learned that courage and humanity often arrive quietly, in simple acts of kindness and bravery. And for the first time in years, the stranger felt that they belonged. They were no longer a figure of fear or mystery. They were part of a community that had been tested by doubt and now understood the true meaning of compassion and acceptance. The town of Red Hollow had changed slowly, quietly, almost without anyone noticing at first. The small acts of kindness, courage, and understanding had begun to take root. People no longer whispered only in fear about the stranger. Instead, their conversations began to reflect curiosity, appreciation, and cautious respect. The once quiet figure at the edge of town was now a presence people acknowledged, though still with care. The stranger walked through the town one morning, carrying a small basket of supplies for neighbors. Some children ran up to say hello, waving and smiling. A few adults offered nods and polite greetings. For the first time in a long time, the stranger felt welcomed rather than judged. They were not fully comfortable yet. Old habits of caution lingered, but they sensed that Red Hollow had started to see them as a human being, not a figure of fear. Ethan noticed the difference too. The steady rancher who had once watched from a distance now felt relief at seeing the change in both the stranger and the town. It had taken patience, small acts of care, and consistent bravery, but the shift was real. He walked alongside the stranger, observing how children approached without hesitation, and how neighbors began trusting them with tasks that required responsibility. One day the stranger helped a group of women carry fresh produce from the market to the homes of elderly residents. Rain had fallen the night before, leaving muddy streets and slippery paths. They worked carefully, encouraging others to move slowly and steady themselves. Their calm and thoughtful guidance reassured those who had once doubted them. By the time the last basket was safely delivered, a quiet sense of admiration had begun to replace the old fear in the eyes of the onlookers.
The stranger continued to share their skills quietly.
They helped mend broken fences, guided lost animals home, and offered careful advice to farmers struggling with crop problems. Each day their presence became more accepted, and the town gradually realized that the stranger's life experience had brought wisdom and resilience rather than danger. Yet, the journey to acceptance was not completely smooth. Some people still clung to suspicion, quietly doubting the stranger's intentions. They hesitated when interacting, careful with words and actions. But even these moments of caution showed progress. People had not ignored the stranger entirely as they once had. They were beginning to weigh evidence over fear, and that was a change in itself. One afternoon, the stranger and Ethan stood near the hills outside of town, overlooking the fields where cattle grazed peacefully. The stranger spoke about the time they had spent wandering, moving from place to place, always seeking safety and a sense of belonging. "I never thought I would find a place where people would see me as a person," the stranger admitted softly. Ethan looked out over the land, nodding gently. "Belonging doesn't happen instantly. It grows slowly, through small acts of trust and kindness. But once it starts, it can change everything." The stranger's eyes softened, realizing the truth of Ethan's words. They had witnessed it firsthand, the children waving without fear, neighbors thanking them and families trusting them with important tasks. Slowly, they were no longer a stranger or a figure of fear. They were becoming a part of the community. Red Hollow began showing its gratitude in small, meaningful ways. A few neighbors invited the stranger to community dinners, and others sought their help with chores and tasks that required steady hands or careful planning. Even those who had been skeptical could not ignore the positive impact the stranger had on the town. One evening, the town gathered for a small harvest festival. For the first time, the stranger participated openly. Children ran around, laughing and sharing stories, while adults spoke politely and kindly. The stranger helped organize games, guided children safely across fields, and even assisted in decorating the communal hall. They moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, no longer trying to stay unnoticed. Ethan watched from a distance, proud of the transformation. The stranger's courage, consistency, and compassion had shown the town what true humanity looked like. Actions that spoke louder than fear and labels. People had learned that understanding, empathy, and support could bridge gaps that suspicion and prejudice had once widened. During the festival, a former skeptic approached the stranger. They extended a hand, not just in greeting, but as an acknowledgement of trust and respect. "I misjudged you," the person admitted quietly. "I see now that I was wrong." The stranger nodded, accepting the apology with a gentle smile. It was a moment that reflected the town's larger journey, from fear and suspicion to understanding and respect. Over the next few weeks, the stranger continued to integrate into daily life. They helped neighbors repair buildings, guided travelers passing through, and even assisted in teaching the children basic skills like handling tools and caring for animals. Their presence was no longer a topic of gossip or fear. It became a source of learning and inspiration. Ethan and the stranger often walked together, sharing reflections on life, resilience, and hope. "You've changed more than just the town," the stranger said one evening watching the sunset. "You've helped me believe I can belong." Ethan smiled softly. "We both needed each other. You've shown courage, and that's what people respond to. The town learned from your actions, just as you learned to trust them." The stranger felt a deep sense of peace they had not known for years. The fear and loneliness that had defined their life were slowly replaced by acceptance and connection. They were no longer just someone passing through Red Hollow. They were part of its story, a living example of kindness, courage, and humanity. The town itself continued to grow and change. People learned that judging someone without knowing them could lead to misunderstanding and lost opportunities for connection. They discovered that courage and compassion could transform fear into trust, and that small acts of kindness often carried the power to change entire communities. Ethan remained a steady presence, not seeking attention or recognition, but quietly supporting the stranger and encouraging the town to embrace understanding over judgment. The bond between the two of them had strengthened, built on shared experiences and respect. In the weeks and months that followed, the stranger became fully integrated into Red Hollow. They celebrated with the community, helped care for animals and neighbors, and guided children with patience and care. The town's initial fear had been replaced with trust, gratitude, and respect. At last, the stranger could walk through the streets without glances of suspicion, without whispers trailing behind. They were no longer a figure of fear, but a symbol of what humanity could be. Someone who had faced judgment and fear, yet responded with courage, kindness, and integrity. Ethan and the stranger stood on the hill one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The town spread out before them, peaceful and calm, bathed in golden light. "Look at 'em," Ethan said quietly. "They've learned what we already knew, that fear disappears when people show trust and kindness." The stranger nodded, feeling a sense of belonging they had long thought impossible. For the first time, they were not just surviving. They were living fully, accepted and respected by those around them. Red Hollow had changed, the stranger had changed, and Ethan had witnessed it all. What had begun as fear and judgment had transformed into understanding, acceptance, and a quiet celebration of humanity. The town had learned that courage and compassion could overcome fear, and the stranger had found a home where kindness was stronger than prejudice. The story ended not with fanfare, but with a sense of lasting peace. The stranger, once feared and misunderstood, had helped the town discover the true meaning of humanity, and in return they had found a place to belong, a life of respect, trust, and quiet joy.